At the private airport terminal, luxury cars rolled past polished glass entrances, while wealthy passengers in tailored suits prepared to board a sleek Gulfstream private jet owned by billionaire entrepreneur Damian Sterling. Among them stood 25-year-old Ethan Carter, a handsome but modestly dressed single father carrying a worn backpack, with his 10-year-old daughter Lily holding a science project she had spent months preparing for. Their commercial flight had been cancelled because of severe weather, and this private jet was their last chance to reach the National Young Innovators competition the next morning. Desperate not to let his daughter miss the opportunity of a lifetime, Ethan approached the gate attendant after noticing 2 empty seats listed on the passenger manifest. Before he could finish speaking, Damian overheard the conversation and turned toward him with a mocking smile. He slowly looked Ethan up and down, taking in his simple jacket, old backpack, and Lily's inexpensive clothes, before laughing loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You want to fly on my jet?" Damian asked. "My aircraft isn't a public bus." Several passengers chuckled as Ethan calmly explained that he was willing to pay for the seats if they were available. Damian's smile widened. "If you want to fly with billionaires, start by looking like one." Laughter spread through the terminal. Lily lowered her head in embarrassment, while Ethan simply placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and turned away without saying a word. For a moment, it seemed like the story would end there, a rich man humiliating a struggling father in front of his daughter. But fate had other plans. Less than 30 minutes later, 2 VIP passengers unexpectedly cancelled, leaving 2 seats available. Despite Damian's objections, his wife Victoria convinced him to sell them rather than leave them empty. Reluctantly, Damian agreed. As Ethan and Lily boarded the jet, the billionaire couldn't resist one final insult. "Try not to touch anything you can't afford." More laughter followed, but Ethan ignored him and helped Lily settle into her seat. As he glanced out the window, however, something caught his attention. For a brief moment, he noticed a faint vibration coming from the left engine and heard a subtle change in its sound. Something so small that no one else paid attention. The vibration disappeared almost instantly, and the flight continued normally. 3 hours later, cruising at 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, that tiny detail would become the difference between life and death. One engine would suffer a catastrophic failure. Panic would spread through the cabin. The billionaire pilot who believed money made him smarter than everyone else would lose control of the situation. And the only person on board with the knowledge, experience, and courage to save every passenger would be the quiet single father he had humiliated in front of the entire airport. As the Gulfstream climbed smoothly through the clouds, most of the passengers quickly settled into the luxury they were accustomed to. Soft leather seats, crystal glasses, and quiet conversations about investments and acquisitions filled the cabin. Lily sat beside the window, her eyes sparkling as she watched the shrinking landscape below. For a few moments, she forgot about the humiliation at the terminal and focused on the excitement of flying on a private jet for the first time. Ethan smiled at her reaction, grateful that she could still find joy despite everything that had happened. Across the aisle, Damian Sterling was already enjoying the attention of his guests. He moved through the cabin like a king inspecting his court, greeting wealthy investors, entrepreneurs, and executives who laughed eagerly at his jokes. To them, Damian represented success, power, and influence. Few people dared to disagree with him. Eventually, his attention returned to Ethan. "So tell me," Damian said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "what exactly do you do for a living?" Several heads turned toward Ethan. "I teach aircraft maintenance," Ethan replied calmly. Damian raised an eyebrow. "A maintenance instructor?" "That's right." A smirk appeared on Damian's face. "So basically a mechanic." A few passengers chuckled. Ethan simply nodded. "If that's how you'd like to describe it." The billionaire laughed. I find it fascinating how people always try to make ordinary jobs sound important. More laughter followed. Lily looked down at her hands. She had heard comments like these before. People often assumed her father wasn't successful because he didn't drive expensive cars or wear designer clothes. What they never understood was that Ethan had chosen a different life. Years earlier, he had been one of the youngest aerospace engineers ever recruited by one of America's largest aviation companies. His work focused on turbine engine diagnostics and emergency failure analysis. Senior engineers twice his age often sought his advice when complex problems appeared during testing. Industry executives predicted he would eventually lead entire engineering divisions. Then, everything changed. When Lily was only 3 years old, Ethan's wife, Sarah, became seriously ill. The treatments were expensive. The hospital visits, endless. For nearly 2 years, Ethan divided his life between engineering projects and hospital rooms. When Sarah finally passed away, Ethan made a decision that shocked everyone around him. He resigned. Friends called him crazy. Colleagues begged him to stay. Several companies offered him higher salaries. But none of that mattered. Lily needed a father more than the aviation industry needed an engineer. So Ethan walked away from a career worth millions and accepted a quiet position teaching future aircraft technicians. He never regretted it. Not once. Back in the cabin, Damien continued entertaining his audience. "I always tell people," he said confidently, "success is simple. The smartest people rise to the top. Everyone else works for them." The passengers nodded approvingly. Ethan remained silent. He had learned long ago that wisdom rarely announced itself. It simply did its job. As the jet continued climbing toward cruising altitude, a subtle vibration passed through the cabin floor. Most passengers never noticed. Ethan did. His eyes immediately shifted toward the nearest window. The vibration lasted less than 2 seconds. Then it disappeared. A few minutes later, he heard it again, this time accompanied by a faint fluctuation in engine tone, barely noticeable. Almost impossible for an untrained ear to detect. Ethan frowned. Something wasn't quite right. He glanced toward the wing and observed the engine nacelle carefully. Nothing appeared abnormal from the outside. No smoke. No visible damage. No unusual movement. Yet the sound bothered him. Years of working around turbine engines had trained him to recognize patterns most people never heard. He listened carefully. Several minutes passed. Then the sound returned once more. Very brief. Very subtle, but definitely there. Ethan quietly unfastened his seatbelt and approached a flight attendant. "Excuse me?" he said politely. Emma Hayes smiled professionally. "How can I help you, sir? I don't want to alarm anyone, but I think the flight crew may want to take a closer look at the left engine readings." Emma blinked. "The engine?" "Yes. What makes you think there's a problem?" Ethan hesitated. "It may be nothing, but I've noticed an intermittent vibration pattern and a slight change in turbine frequency." Emma looked surprised. "That sounds pretty specific." Ethan smiled politely. "I've spent a lot of time around aircraft." Before Emma could respond, Damien appeared from behind them. "Is there a problem?" Emma explained the situation. The billionaire laughed immediately. "Let me guess. Our mechanic thinks he knows more about airplanes than the people flying them." Several nearby passengers laughed with him. Ethan remained calm. "I didn't say there was definitely a problem." "But you wanted to warn the crew?" "Yes." Damien shook his head. "You know what's wrong with people these days? They hear one strange sound and suddenly think they're experts." The passengers chuckled again. Emma looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps I should still mention it to the cockpit." Damien waved dismissively. "The aircraft just completed a full inspection yesterday." Then he turned toward Ethan. "Relax. This isn't one of your classroom training models." More laughter followed. Ethan returned quietly to his seat. Lily looked at him. "Dad, were you worried?" He glanced toward the wing one more time. A little. Should we be scared? Ethan forced a reassuring smile. No, not scared. But? He stared out the window. But if I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing, I hope I'm wrong. Far ahead of them, dark storm clouds were beginning to build across the horizon. And deep inside the left engine, a problem that nobody wanted to believe existed was slowly getting worse. For the next hour, the flight continued without incident, and most passengers completely forgot about Ethan's warning. The laughter that had followed Damien's mockery gradually faded into the comfortable rhythm of a luxury journey. Business executives reviewed presentations on their tablets. Investors discussed market opportunities. A famous social media entrepreneur filmed videos for his followers from the comfort of his leather seat. To everyone on board, the flight seemed perfectly normal. But Ethan couldn't relax. Every few minutes, he heard it again. A faint vibration, a subtle change in engine pitch, a brief fluctuation that lasted only seconds before disappearing. The problem wasn't constant. And that worried him even more. Intermittent failures were often far more dangerous than obvious ones because they convinced people that nothing was wrong. Lily noticed her father repeatedly glancing toward the wing. Dad? Yeah? You're still thinking about the engine, aren't you? Ethan nodded slightly. A little. Can you tell what's wrong? Not yet. Lily frowned. I thought you knew everything about airplanes. That made Ethan smile. Nobody knows everything about airplanes. What do you know? He looked out the window. I know that machines usually whisper before they scream. Lily didn't fully understand what he meant. She would soon. Thousands of feet ahead, the aircraft approached a massive weather system stretching across hundreds of miles of ocean. Towering storm clouds rose like mountains into the upper atmosphere. Inside the cockpit, Captain Ryan Brooks monitored the weather radar carefully. We should probably adjust course 20 degrees south, Ryan suggested. Damien sat confidently in the left seat. We'll lose time. Only about 12 minutes. Then let's stay on course. Ryan frowned. The turbulence ahead looks stronger than expected. Damien shrugged. This jet can handle it. Reluctantly, Ryan returned his attention to the instruments. At first, the turbulence was mild. A few bumps. Nothing unusual. Passengers barely noticed. Then the aircraft entered the outer edge of the storm. The cabin shook harder. Drinks rattled against tables. Seatbelt signs illuminated. Several passengers stopped their conversations. A few minutes later, another warning appeared on a cockpit display. LOWOIL, pressure left engine. Ryan immediately noticed it. Damien, the billionaire, looked over. What? Ryan pointed toward the screen. For a moment, neither man spoke. The warning remained visible for several seconds, then disappeared. Damien leaned back. Sensor glitch. Ryan wasn't convinced. Maybe. Definitely. You don't know that. Damien sighed. The aircraft was inspected yesterday. That doesn't mean components can't fail. Damien dismissed the concern. Keep monitoring it. Ryan reluctantly agreed. Back in the cabin, Ethan felt another vibration. This one was stronger. Significantly stronger. His eyes narrowed. The pattern was changing. Whatever issue existed inside the engine was becoming more frequent. Emma passed by during her cabin check. Ethan stopped her. Has the crew reported anything unusual? Emma hesitated. Why? The vibration is getting worse. You can feel that? Yes. Emma glanced toward the cockpit. There was a brief warning earlier. Ethan's expression immediately changed. What warning? I probably shouldn't say. Please. Emma lowered her voice. Something about oil pressure. For the first time since boarding, genuine concern appeared on Ethan's face. How long ago? Maybe 10 minutes. Ethan leaned back slowly. That wasn't good. Not good at all. He looked toward the wing again. The storm outside continued growing darker. Lightning flashed in the distance. Inside the engine, increasing vibration combined with oil pressure problems could mean several different failures. None of them were minor. The aircraft suddenly lurched violently. Several passengers gasped. A woman screamed. Overhead compartments rattled. Then came another vibration. Stronger than before. This time, Ethan could actually feel it through the floor beneath his feet. His heartbeat accelerated. Now, he was certain. Something was seriously wrong. In the cockpit, Ryan noticed another warning. Low oil pressure left engine. This time, it stayed on. Seconds passed. The warning remained. Ryan immediately sat forward. "Damien," the billionaire's confidence began fading. "I see it. Now what?" Before Damien could answer, a second alert appeared. "Left engine temperature high." Neither man spoke. The cockpit suddenly felt much smaller. Ryan looked at Damien. "We need to reduce power and divert." Damien hesitated. "Let's observe it for a few minutes." "A few minutes? Maybe it's still a sensor issue." Ryan stared at him in disbelief. Two separate warnings aren't sensor issues. The aircraft shook again. Harder this time. Outside, lightning illuminated the clouds. Inside the cabin, conversations stopped completely. Passengers were beginning to notice the tension. Then came a new smell. At first, it was faint, barely noticeable. A few passengers wrinkled their noses. Then it grew stronger. Burning. Hot metal. Electrical insulation. Ethan immediately recognized it. His stomach dropped. He looked toward the cockpit. "Oh no." Lily saw the expression on his face. "Dad?" Ethan didn't answer. Because at that exact moment, a deafening explosion tore through the aircraft. Boom! The entire cabin shook violently. Passengers screamed. The jet rolled sharply to one side. Luggage flew from compartments. Drinks crashed onto the floor. A bright orange flash erupted outside the left side windows. Then came another sound, a terrible grinding roar, like metal tearing itself apart. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Children cried. People shouted prayers. Someone screamed that the plane was crashing. Inside the cockpit, alarms exploded to life from every direction. Engine fire. Engine failure. Hydraulic system damage. Warning. 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 Red lights flashed across every display. The left engine was gone. Not completely detached, but catastrophically damaged. And at 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, the billionaire pilot who believed he controlled everything suddenly realized he was losing control of the aircraft. While panic consumed the cabin, only one passenger remained completely still, Ethan Carter. Because the moment he heard the explosion, he already knew something terrifying. The engine failure itself wasn't the biggest threat. What happened next would determine whether everyone lived or died. The cabin descended into chaos. Passengers screamed as the aircraft lurched violently through the storm. Oxygen masks dangled from the ceiling. Drinks, phones, and bags slid across the floor. Several people were crying openly. Others gripped their armrests so tightly their knuckles turned white. Outside the windows, flashes of lightning illuminated the crippled left engine. What had once been a smooth, powerful turbine now looked like a wounded machine fighting for survival. Inside the cockpit, the situation was even worse. Warning alarms filled the air. Engine fire. Hydraulic failure. Electrical bus damage. Master warning. Master warning. Master warning. Red and amber lights flashed across nearly every display. Captain Ryan Brooks worked frantically through emergency checklists, while Damien Sterling struggled to keep the aircraft level. The controls felt different. Heavier. less responsive. The aircraft wasn't behaving normally anymore. "We've lost significant thrust," Ryan shouted. "I know that." Damien pulled on the controls. The jet shuddered again. Another warning appeared. "Secondary hydraulic pressure low." Ryan's eyes widened. This is getting worse. Damien's confidence was beginning to crack. For the first time since takeoff, genuine fear appeared in his voice. "Contact the nearest airport." Ryan immediately transmitted a distress call. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Gulfstream 729er. We have experienced catastrophic engine failure and possible hydraulic damage. Request immediate emergency routing." Static answered. Then, air traffic control responded. The nearest suitable runway was still hundreds of miles away, and a major storm sat directly between them and safety. Back in the cabin, Ethan was already analyzing the situation. His engineering mind worked faster than panic. The explosion, the oil pressure warnings, the burning smell, the increasing vibrations, the hydraulic alerts. The pieces were starting to fit together. And the picture forming in his mind terrified him. Because this wasn't just an engine failure. Something else had been damaged during the explosion. Something critical. Emma Hayes rushed through the cabin checking passengers. When she reached Ethan, she noticed something unusual. While everyone else looked terrified, Ethan looked focused, like a man solving a problem. "What do we do?" Emma asked nervously. Ethan looked directly at her. "How bad are the warnings?" Emma hesitated. "I heard hydraulic damage." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. That confirmed it. The engine failure had likely sent debris into nearby systems. If enough hydraulic lines had been compromised, the aircraft could lose more control authority with every passing minute. Emma saw the concern in his face. "Can they handle it?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. That alone told her everything. A violent jolt shook the aircraft. Several passengers screamed again. A businessman was praying. A woman hugged her child. Someone shouted that the plane was going down. Emma looked toward the cockpit, then back at Ethan. "What should I do?" "Get me into the cockpit." Her eyes widened. "What?" "Now. You can't just walk into the cockpit." Emma. It was the first time he had used her name. His voice remained calm, but there was urgency behind it. "If my assessment is correct, they're fighting the wrong problem." "You don't know that." "I know enough." Another violent shake interrupted them. The aircraft dropped suddenly. Gasps echoed throughout the cabin. Several oxygen masks swung wildly overhead. Emma grabbed a seat for balance. Ethan remained surprisingly steady. "Please," he said quietly. "Every minute matters." Before Emma could answer, Damien's voice came over the cabin intercom. His confident tone had disappeared. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have experienced a mechanical issue. The crew is handling the situation. Please remain seated." The message only made passengers more nervous. Everyone could hear the fear hidden behind his words. Emma made a decision. She hurried toward the cockpit. Moments later, she entered. Ryan looked exhausted. Damien looked furious. "We have a passenger who says he may understand what's happening." Damien immediately knew who she meant. "You mean the mechanic?" "Ethan Carter." Damien rolled his eyes. "This is not the time." Ryan glanced up. "What exactly did he say?" Emma repeated Ethan's concerns. The co-pilot frowned. "What kind of maintenance instructor notices turbine frequency changes from the passenger cabin?" Damien scoffed. A lucky guess. Ryan wasn't so sure. Before he could respond, another warning appeared. "Electrical bus failure." A new alarm sounded. Different, more urgent. Ryan stared at the display. His blood ran cold. The damage was spreading. Damien saw it too. The cockpit fell silent. Because both pilots understood exactly what it meant. The engine explosion had not remained isolated. Multiple systems were now failing, and they didn't know why. Ryan looked toward the cockpit door. "Bring him in." Damien snapped his head around. "What?" "We need another set of eyes. He's a maintenance instructor." Ryan didn't look away from the warning panel. "And right now, he's the only person on this aircraft who noticed something was wrong before either of us." For several seconds, Damien said nothing. Then, another violent jolt rocked the jet. The controls trembled in his hands. A new caution light illuminated. Fuel imbalance. The situation was deteriorating faster than either pilot expected. Finally, Damien exhaled. Fine. A minute later, Ethan entered the cockpit. For the first time since takeoff, the billionaire and the single father stood face to face without an audience, without laughter, without mockery, without pride. Only a failing aircraft between them. Damien crossed his arms. "You have 2 minutes." Ethan ignored the challenge. His eyes immediately moved across the instrument panels. Engine readings, hydraulic pressure, fuel flow, electrical systems, warning messages. He absorbed information with astonishing speed. Ryan watched carefully. 30 seconds passed. Then Ethan's expression changed. "What is it?" Ryan asked. Ethan pointed toward one display, then another, then another. "The engine explosion isn't the main problem." Silence filled the cockpit. Damien frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ethan looked directly at him. The turbine fragments penetrated systems behind the engine housing. Ryan felt a chill run through his body. Because suddenly everything made sense. The hydraulic failures, the electrical warnings, the fuel imbalance, all connected. Ethan continued. "You're not losing one system." He pointed toward the flashing alerts. "You're losing 3. The cockpit fell silent. Outside, lightning flashed across the storm clouds. Inside, for the first time, both pilots realized the true danger. The aircraft wasn't recovering. It was slowly dying. And unless someone found a solution soon, the Gulf Stream wouldn't reach any runway at all. The emergency vehicles surrounded the runway as the crippled Gulf Stream finally rolled to a stop. For several seconds, nobody moved. The cabin was completely silent, except for the sound of passengers breathing heavily, trying to understand that they were still alive. Then someone began to clap. Another passenger joined, then another. Within moments, the entire cabin erupted into applause. Some passengers cried openly. Others hugged complete strangers. A few simply sat in their seats, overwhelmed by the realization that they had come within minutes of dying. At the front of the aircraft, Damien Sterling remained frozen in the cockpit. His hands still rested on the controls. The same hands that had once pointed at Ethan Carter and mocked him in front of an entire terminal. Now those hands were trembling, because he knew the truth. Without Ethan, none of them would have survived. As emergency crews escorted passengers from the aircraft, many stopped to thank Ethan personally. Some shook his hand. Others embraced him. One elderly passenger simply looked him in the eyes and said, "You gave me another chance to see my grandchildren." Ethan smiled politely, but his attention was elsewhere. Lily. The moment he stepped onto the tarmac, his daughter ran toward him and wrapped her arms around him. "You saved everybody, Dad." Ethan hugged her tightly. "No," he whispered. "We all saved each other." The story could have ended there, but it didn't. Over the following days, aviation investigators examined every detail of the incident. The findings shocked even experienced experts. The failed engine had suffered a catastrophic internal fracture. When the turbine disintegrated, high-speed metal fragments had torn through hydraulic lines, electrical systems, and fuel control components. According to the official report, the chain reaction should have resulted in a complete loss of control long before the aircraft reached land. Then, investigators discovered something else. Someone on board had correctly identified the problem before the explosion occurred. Someone had recognized the warning signs long before the cockpit alarms activated. That person was Ethan Carter. When reporters began digging into his background, an extraordinary story emerged. The quiet single father was not merely an aircraft maintenance instructor. Years earlier, Ethan had been one of the youngest aerospace engineers in the country. He had contributed to emergency engine failure research and helped develop safety procedures still used throughout the aviation industry. Several of the very checklists that helped save the aircraft that day had been influenced by his work. News channels across the country shared the story. Headlines appeared everywhere. Single father saves billionaire's private jet after being publicly humiliated. Young engineer turned dad prevents mid-air disaster. Hero passenger helps save 32 lives. The public reaction was immediate. Millions watched videos showing Damien mocking Ethan before takeoff. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The billionaire who believed wealth made him superior had nearly lost control of the crisis. The humble father he insulted had become the reason everyone survived. Several weeks later, Damien requested a private meeting. When Ethan arrived, there were no cameras, no reporters, no audience, just two men sitting across from each other. For a long moment, Damien said nothing. Then he finally spoke. "I judged you because of your clothes." Ethan remained silent. "I thought success looked like money." His voice carried none of the arrogance it once had. "I was wrong." For the first time in his life, Damien Sterling genuinely apologized. Not because he was forced to, not because the public demanded it, but because he finally understood the lesson that almost cost him everything. Ethan looked at him calmly. The most valuable people in the world are often the ones nobody notices. Damien lowered his eyes. He knew Ethan was right. Months later, Lily stood on a stage at the National Young Innovators competition, the event she had nearly missed. After winning one of the competition's highest honors, she stepped to the microphone. The audience waited. Lily smiled. Then she said, "My dad taught me something I'll never forget. The smartest people don't spend their lives trying to prove they're important. They spend their lives helping others." The room erupted into applause. In the front row, Ethan sat quietly. Just another father, supporting his daughter. Exactly where he wanted to be. Because despite the headlines, the interviews, and the recognition, Ethan never cared about fame. He cared about doing the right thing. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. The billionaire had believed money made a person valuable. The storm proved otherwise. When thousands of pounds of metal were falling from the sky, wealth couldn't save a single life. Character could. Knowledge could. Humility could. And sometimes, the person capable of changing everyone's fate isn't the richest person in the room. It's the quiet single father sitting unnoticed in the back. As the days passed and the headlines slowly faded, one lesson from that flight remained impossible to forget. It wasn't about aviation, engines, or emergency procedures. It was about people. Before the aircraft ever left the ground, most of the passengers had already decided who Ethan Carter was. They saw a young single father in simple clothes, carrying an old backpack, and assumed he was ordinary. Meanwhile, Damien Sterling seemed to represent everything society admires: wealth, power, influence, and success. People listened to him, respected him, and laughed at his jokes without questioning whether he had truly earned that admiration. But life has a way of revealing truths that appearances often hide. When the engine failed at 35,000 feet, money didn't matter. Status didn't matter. Expensive suits, luxury cars, and private jets suddenly became meaningless. The only things that mattered were knowledge, courage, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. And the person who possessed those qualities wasn't the billionaire sitting in the cockpit. It was the quiet father sitting in the passenger cabin. Perhaps that's why this story resonates with so many people. Most of us have been underestimated at some point in our lives. We've all experienced moments when others judged us based on our appearance, our job, our background, or our circumstances, without ever taking the time to learn our story. Ethan Carter represents every person who has ever been overlooked, every person whose true value wasn't immediately visible. He never tried to impress anyone. He didn't seek attention, recognition, or praise. Instead, he focused on what truly mattered, raising his daughter, helping others, and doing the right thing, even when nobody was watching. His greatest achievement wasn't saving an aeroplane. His greatest achievement was becoming the kind of person capable of saving an airplane when the moment arrived. Years before that flight, Ethan had sacrificed a promising career to be there for his daughter. Many people would have seen that decision as a step backward, but in reality, those years of sacrifice, responsibility, and quiet perseverance shaped the character that ultimately saved dozens of lives. The same is true for countless people around us every day. There are parents making sacrifices for their children, teachers shaping future generations, workers performing important jobs without recognition, and ordinary individuals carrying burdens that nobody else sees. They may never appear in headlines, but their impact is often far greater than people realize. Damien Sterling learned a lesson that day that money could never teach him. Wealth can buy comfort, influence, and luxury, but it cannot buy character. It cannot buy wisdom. And it cannot buy the respect that comes from putting others before yourself. So as this story comes to an end, remember this: never underestimate someone because they appear ordinary. The quietest person in the room may possess the greatest strength. The most humble person may carry the greatest wisdom. And the person everyone overlooks today may become the hero everyone remembers tomorrow. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for Humanity Rewritten. We'll see you in the next story, where courage, resilience, and humanity shine when they're needed most.
Thank you for watching my video.